Go. Okay, welcome everybody to today's class. We are going to have an awesome conversation today, a discussion, and it's got a lot of Hasidic and Kabbalistic lessons. And so, my friends, I hope that
Hasidic lessons. Yud 7 was the Alter Rebbe's Yotzeit this past week.
Okay, and so I hope that everybody has the papers ready to go, the curriculum downloaded. Yes, you're right. There was a Yotzeit this week, and it's going to feature in our class. So, Ron, that was awesome. And my friends, this is the conversation that's about to come up. It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. Before God takes the Jewish people out of Egypt, he gives a certain command. He tells them to do something. And in that command, there seems to be a second instruction latent, hidden there. So we're going to discuss that. Furthermore, we're going to get to what the hidden instruction is, and then finally, what could have been better in that moment than doing what God had instructed. So let's take a look. We've all heard of the Abrahamic Accords, and it's named after a moment early in the book of Genesis where Abraham has a conversation with God. God says to Abraham, I'm going to send your children into exile, and they're going to come out of exile with great wealth. Well, years pass, and we see how the Jewish people do get landed in Egypt, and we see this process now that in our parsha and last week's portion specifically, the Jewish people are on the way out. They're finally about to leave. And now Abraham turns around and says, hey, there's something missing in this turn of events. Or perhaps Abraham says it. And as we'll see, the response is already provided. The promise that God made to Abraham was, I'm going to give them exile, and when they come out, they'll come out with great wealth. And so in our parsha, or in last week's parsha better, Moses passes on this instruction to the people straight from God. Go and tell all of the Jewish people to go to their Egyptian neighbors and collect and borrow and take items of value, take wealth with them. And the explanation is so that this promise to Abraham is fulfilled. But what's fascinating is that one person doesn't seem to be collecting wealth. Everybody is enthusiastic, they're going to get it, and there's one person, and that's Moses, and he's not doing that. So in our conversation today, in our lesson today, we're going to learn, why was it important to plunder Egypt? Why did the Jewish people need all that stuff? What were they going to do with it? Why did they need it? We'll find out why it had to be an instruction from God, and we're going to find out what was Moses up to. And why was he doing something else? And so, my friends, let's open up straight away to source number 1. And this is from last week's Torah portion, Parshat Bo. And in Parshat Bo, we see in verse 11, we discover, in chapter 11, verse 2, when Hashem prepared the Jews for the final step of the Exodus, Hashem asked Moshe to relay to the Jews an important message. So let me ask, Susan, can you please read for us source 1 with the commentary, with the second paragraph too?
Okay. Please speak to the people discreetly, and let each man request gold and silver articles from his friend. Let every woman make the same request of her friends. Please speak. The verse is saying that I ask you to warn them about this, to ask their neighbors for vessels, so that the righteous man Abraham will not say that God fulfilled with them his promise, and they will enslave them and oppress them. But he did not fulfill with him the conclusion of his promise. Afterwards, they will go forth with great possessions.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. So we see how Moses is now told, pass on the instruction. Daber Noah, speak to the people, give them this instruction to collect the wealth. And Rashi tells us, yes, they need to do this because there is a two-part promise that has to be fulfilled. One part of the promise is the Jews are leaving. Part two of the promise is they need to leave with great wealth. Abraham is ensuring that the Jewish people will leave with great wealth. That's the Rashi right there. So then we move from there into, let's see, did the Jewish people actually collect this wealth? Let's find out. Source number 2, let's get Ron. Can you please read for us source 2, how the Jews did as God commanded and drained Egypt of its wealth?
The Jews did as had said. They requested from the Egyptians silver and gold, articles, and clothing. God made the Egyptians respect the people, and they granted their request. The Jews thus drained Egypt of its wealth.
Thank you, Ron. So, my friends, the Jewish people have got all this wealth. They leave Egypt. Now, how long were the Jewish people meant to be going for?
To be 400 years, but they only went 225.
They were stuck in Egypt for a longer period of time, hundreds of years, as you correctly said. But how long were they meant to go out into the desert for?
3 days.
3 days. Moses came to Pharaoh and said, please let the people go for 3 days.
Yes.
Now, mind you, if someone comes to your house, someone you know, someone who's your slave, and says, look, I'm going on a 3-day vacation, and I want to look good. Can you lend me your leather jacket? Can you lend me your big hat? Can you lend me your socks? Whatever. You're getting it back. Like, what's the big deal? So the Jewish people have made this arrangement with all their neighbors that they're going to take all this stuff. Probably, I mean, I'm just guessing that the Egyptians think they're going to return it too. But then there's another, there's something that's missing. There's something going on in this story. What happens? The Jewish people leave, and they leave Egypt, and they travel for a period of time. The Jewish people are being followed by messengers of Pharaoh, spies in a way, who are going to report back to Pharaoh and tell him this is, they're following the plan. They're not following the plan. That's 3 days, not 3 days. 1.5 days in, they realize this is not working. They go and tell him. 3 days in, they tell the Jews, like, what's the deal? You guys said 3 days. But the Jews, they keep on going. By now, Pharaoh is able to turn around and recognize that the Jewish people have run away. And now Pharaoh brings out all the armed forces, all the king's men, and off they go. And they're following the Jewish people onto the sea. So if you've wondered how it turns out that people going on a 3-day vacation are suddenly becoming fugitives, running away from Pharaoh, now we've got a little bit of the story. But why must this be the story? Why do we need a 3-day alibi? What's that about? And so I want to draw your attention momentarily to something that happens to the Jewish people a long time ago. Pharaoh gathers his advisors and he says, we have the Jewish problem, how are we going to deal with it? The advisors say, you're really ultimately only afraid of one Jewish savior. Well, why don't you drown all the savior, all the possibilities, all the possible options, drown them in the sea. Now, God, his method of, call it retribution or punishment, is called midah keneged midah. It's the way it was done is the way it's returned. Or with what you did wrong is what you get it back. That's the kind of, that's one way to translate it, if I'm doing an okay job of that. Since Pharaoh had made an attempt on the Jewish people by drowning them in the river, in the Nile. So it was God's intention to bait out Pharaoh and the Egyptians to the water. And then when they get to the water, then God would drown them all. And that would be a punishment which would be relevant to the crime. The crime is drowning the Jewish males. The punishment is drowning the Egyptian army in the river. And that brings us to where we're up to right now. Source number 3, which is chapter 14 of Exodus, tells us the long description straight out of the Torah, straight out of the Chumash. Source number 3 tells us what happens at the sea. And so here, I'm going to ask Yossi, do you have the papers with you?
I don't.
Okay. Do you have a link for them?
No, I don't.
Okay,
was
someone
not
will
able-
post the link for you.
I haven't been getting any of your emails. I sent you about 3 or 4 emails, never got an answer.
Right, we have to figure that out. It's a problem. Someone will post the link in the chat and you can pull it up over there. But I'm going to ask, and then Yaakov, you can also download the text like that. So let's ask Juan, can you please read for us source number 3?
Right. Moses extended.
Juan, sorry, we're going to ask Juan. Juan is another one of the participants. I'm sorry, that's okay.
Sorry, Ron, Juan.
That's
don't call me late for supper.
Moses extended his hand over the sea. During the entire night, God drove back the sea with a mighty east wind, transforming the sea bed into a dry land and dividing the waters. The Jews entered the sea bed on dry land. The water was on their right and left like 2 worlds. The Egyptians gave chase and came after the Jews. All Pharaoh horses, chariot, corps, and cavalry went into the middle of the sea. God then said to Moses, extend your hand over the sea, and the water will come back over the Egyptian, and it will cover the chariot, corpse, and cavalry, whatever. Just before morning, Moses sent his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its normal condition. The Egyptians were fleeing the waters, but God trampled the Egyptians into the middle of the ocean. The waters came back and covered the cavalry and chariots of all Pharaoh army that had followed the youth into the sea. Not a single one remained. Thus, on that day, God rescued the Jews from Egypt. The Jews say the Egyptian dead, saw the Egyptian dead on the seashore.
All right, stop there for a moment. We'll continue a little more of the last verse over there in a second. But notice how in this last line, thus on that day, God rescued the Jews from Egypt. The Jews saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Now I ask you, my dear friends, is that a nice thing to see? You get out of the water, and suddenly all that you can see behind you is lots of bodies. If you ask me, it's nearly grotesque. And so the coming piece of information, which Juan will read again for us, gives a view into this. So Juan, take it away. The Jews saw.
We saw the Egyptian dead on the seashore. For the sea spilled them out of the shore, so that the Jews will not say, just as we come up from this side of the sea, they came up the far side, and they will pursue us.
Excellent. So Rashi here comes in to tell us something very important. You, as a regular Jew, we're coming out of the water. We know that we just had something miraculous. But coming out of the water, you look behind yourself, you wonder, look, if we're all here, then most likely the guys who were behind us, our oppressors, are going to turn up somewhere too. So God needs to perform this miracle and show the corpse of the Egyptians. He has to bring them up onto the seashore so that everyone can know what to be expected next. But there's something else in verse 30 that we need to figure out over here. The next verse tells us that Moses led the Jewish people away from the Red Sea, and they went out into the Shur desert. They traveled for 3 days in the desert without finding any work. So that's the verse, and I read it for one, but there's something there that we've got to pay attention to. Why is Moses leading the people away from the seashore? Why is that important? So Rashi then tells us, fills us in on something new that we didn't know yet. Rashi tells us Moses led the Jews away from the Red Sea. Why? Against their will. Against their will, he took them away. Why? Because the Egyptians had adorned their horses with gold, silver, and precious stones. And the Jews found it all in the sea. On the seashore, the spoils of the sea were more significant than the spoils they obtained in Egypt. So now Moses has to lead the people away because there's so much on the seashore, there's so much wealth there that the Jews could be stuck. Maybe they'd be there still now. So in order to take care of this, Moses leads the people away and pushes them further onto their journey, and the Jewish people continue. Are you interested to know just how much wealth the Jewish people picked up on the way out of Egypt?
All of Egypt's wealth.
Yeah, they picked up all of Egypt's wealth, but how much was that? Okay, well, we'll give you a testimony right here. So from source number 4 is the tractate Bechayros. It talks about, at least begins by talking about the first on 5b of Talmud Bechayros. In source number 4, we're going to discover how much was left over. Let's ask Yaakov, do you have the source sheets with us? You are mute still.
I do not.
Okay, they're in the link. If you can click on that link, you will have them. But let's ask someone who does have it. Do you have it yet?
I do have 2 questions there.
Okay, 2 questions.
Question number 1 is: when did we become friends with the Egyptians? And number 2 is why are we asked to borrow the jewelry instead of take forever? Because we're not giving it back. We're not borrowing it. We're not taking it. We're taking it. They're not friends. They've been torturing us for 210 years. And then they're not our neighbors. They're our arch enemies. So why all the misnomers throughout this entire story, as well as why let us go out for 3 days. We're not going to go out for 3 days. We never were going to go out for 3 days. Why doesn't Moses just be honest and God tell him to be honest and say, let my people go forever because we're leaving, and that's what we're asking for.
Yaakov, these are good questions, and I've got an answer for you.
Awesome.
Good.
Right? I think we've got an answer. Number 1, I'm not sure why you might think that the Egyptians are friends. It says Vayishalu, and they asked them for it. Vayishalu typically in Hebrew, Vayishal is I'm asking you for it, I'm borrowing it for it. But you can also translate it as please give it to me. Nevertheless, there's another way to look at this. And I'm going to say it fairly briefly. The Jewish people had to lead on a story. They had to give off an impression of what was going on. 3 days, lend me. they needed to bait the Egyptians out of Egypt. They needed to bring the Egyptians to the river because, like we spoke earlier, the Egyptians had made the Jews suffer with the river, and so their punishment, midah keneged midah, tit for tat, their punishment was going to be with the water. The Egyptians said, we'll get rid of the savior by drowning him. God says, I'm going to get rid of the Egyptians by drowning them. That's the answer that we discussed a bit earlier on tonight, and I hope that satisfies the question that you had. It does. Okay, so here we hit source number 4. Susan's got a question. Go for it.
Well, I've always had a problem with this, that we as living as slaves, I can't see that as a slave community is living with Egyptians who have gold and silver to our neighbors. I thought this is more kind of like extortion. I think the Egyptians were afraid of the Israelites' God after all of these plagues, especially the death of the firstborn. So to borrow, that's what they were led to believe. But you know, I feel uncomfortable because well, you know, to me, once again, it's not the honest thing to do. To me, it felt like extortion for the Israelites to borrow this. They may not have known they were going on a forever trip. I don't know what Aaron told them, but you know, it certainly Aaron and Moses knew what the plan was. I'm not sure whether the Israelites knew the whole plan, but that always kind of troubled me. And then I just have another question.
Okay.
I never seemed to find, did the Pharaoh die in the Red Sea? Was there another Pharaoh, or did he let his troops go in and he lived on? I never seemed to find that information.
I'm glad you asked the second question because it allows me to not answer the first question.
But I want an answer to the first question.
Okay, but now that you asked the second question, I can ignore the first question, move to the second, and then no one will ever know I missed the first question. Okay, fine. So the first question was, it seems like extortion. It's not fair. How come? Like, how is this that we just misrepresenting ourselves? We're borrowing from the Egyptians, and then we disappear. So, I mean, if you want to talk about injustice, then we might want to start a claim with the United Nations against the Egyptians for the way they terrorized and abused the Jewish people for over 200 years while they were in Egypt. So clearly the scale isn't set like on an equal standard yet, right? The Jews and the Egyptians are not like on the same hierarchy level. The Egyptians have been oppressors for 200 years. The Jews have been victims for 200 years. They're finally on their way out. Maybe, perhaps, just on a, on a simple, like a humanistic, egotistical level, the Jews are in a way reclaiming or being paid for the damages.
Well, you can think it could be reparations, and you know, what do I know? You know, I'm just reading and questioning. It's just that to start off fresh and to be leading into a new life with dishonesty, that troubles me. So doesn't mean I'm right, doesn't mean I'm wrong.
Okay, so a comment on question 1 is coming from Robert.
Oh, thank you. Well, just the 3-day thing that Moses asks, you know, Moses asks Pharaoh, can we go for 3 days? I think that's actually quite insightful on Moses' part, because here we learn about Pharaoh that he won't even grant the 3-day, you know, exodus. He won't even grant that. It's an insight into just how corrupt that regime is and how hopeless the situation of the Israelites is. And so I think it underscores the need for a complete break, because there's no hope of anything coming from that man.
Okay, yes, fair. So I mean, that's a great point. It seems like now finally the Jews are able to go, right? And if he's not letting them go for 3 days, like, get out as quick as you can. Let's go, move. In a way. Okay, so we're still left. I'm sorry, we're still left with Susan's ultimate question of: is this a good behavior? Is this a good behavior set to be taking stuff on loan, inverted commas, right? Claiming it's a loan and then disappearing with it. Is that honest? A bit of the coming conversation in section B of tonight's curriculum will shed a bit of light on the value of taking all this wealth.
Well, I did read it, but I didn't agree with it all, so.
Okay, not always does one have to agree. I can't always I can't convince you, right? I can only present the sources. But your second question caught my attention.
May I make a quick comment?
Yes, Yossi, go for it.
In chapter 12, verses 35 to the end, it seems that Moses himself is the one who tells them to do that, and God actually approved it.
Okay, I am opening my homework to get a look at that. Verses, chapter 12, which one?
Verse 35 to the end, which is two verses, 35 and 36. So and the children of Israel did as Moses told them, and they asked of the Egyptians the silver, kli kesef, kli zahav, smalot, and Yehovah natan et achen ha'am be'enei Mitzrayim.
Okay, so pause for a second. Yossi. Right when we started the class, the first source we pulled up was Shmois, Exodus, chapter 11, verse 2. So head over to chapter 11, verse 2. You have verse 1 says, Vayomer Hashem el Moshe. Now you know that there's a conversation going on between God and Moses. Verse 2, Daber na ba'oznei ha'am, speaking to the ears of the Jewish people. And by the way, for those who don't have a chumash in front of you, you have this source 1 on the first page of the curriculum. It says, speak to the people and tell them to borrow, to tell them to take each, or to ask for each person from their neighbor,
exactly,
and each woman from her neighbor, klei chesef and klei zahav.
Exactly, and that's what I'm saying. So it came directly from God.
It is an instruction from God. It's absolutely an instruction from God. That doesn't mean that in a person's humanistic realm, they have to understand it or agree with it, right? Humans are different. Humans are able to question God's ways, and that's okay. There's no problem, because in Judaism we don't have a God who's going to strike you down from heaven with a rod of lightning because you question. That's not a Jewish idea. And in fact, in Judaism we say question, please question, right? And so we will get to finding a solution for issue number 1, which is the humanistic area, the humanistic thing of this, like how can you just take stuff from someone else on a false pretense, even though they oppressed you for 200 years. A similar way to look at it, just to give you a historical thought about it, is imagine a survivor of the Holocaust, of the concentration camp, is walking home after they've been liberated from a camp, and they walk past the home of an SS officer, and they stop by for a glass of water, right? And in the meanwhile, perhaps dishonestly, the guy picks up $100. Is it easier to find a humanistic, like, okay, maybe you deserve that $100 after working so hard for 5 years? Is it easier to find that? I'm not saying it is. I'm not saying it isn't. It's just another way to look at it. I want to move forward because we need to respect the clock, and we're going to disrespect it in about 20 minutes.
But that in fact did happen, because Germany paid a lot of reparations to survivors in Israel.
The flip side is that in that case, Germany offered it. In this case, God tells Moses, tell the people to get it, to receive it. By the way, if you ask for it and you're given it, why can't it be yours? Okay, let's continue the conversation after the rest of the curriculum, because we're still at source number 4 and we've got another couple pages to go. So source number 4, a quote from a quote from tractate Bechoros, and we're going to discover here just how much gold and silver was taken out of Egypt. There was not one member of the Jewish people who did not have 90 Nubian donkeys. Nubian donkeys in the square brackets, which were considered to be of superior quality. With him, they were laden with the silver and gold of the Egyptians. And on this, the Rebbe makes a comment, and let's ask Rabbi Shmuel, will you please read for us fairly quickly,
Yeah.
the Rebbe on page, you tell me which page?
5.
Page 5. Thank you.
When describing the Exodus, the Torah says when Pharaoh sent out the nation, implying that he was to be credited with the freedom of the Jewish people. Hasidism explains, based on Midrashic teachings, that Pharaoh and the Egyptians are indeed to be credited with the superior state of the Jewish people at the time of the Exodus. On the most basic level, it is a reference to the fact that the Jews borrowed gold, silver, and precious garments from the Egyptians, draining the country of its wealth. As the Talmud relates, every single Jew had 90 Nubian donkeys laden with the best of Egypt's possessions, and their wealth was vastly expanded following the splitting of the sea, to the extent that Moses needed to drag them away to Mount Sinai to receive the Torah. As stated in the verse, Moses led the Israelites away from the Red Sea.
Awesome. Thank you, Reb Shmuel. So the Hasidic teachings teach us that the word for Beshalach actually means that Pharaoh sent the Jewish people away on a much higher level than they were when they first entered Egypt. That is a teaching about the term Beshalach. On the most basic translation and understanding of this idea, we understand that the Jews are better off because they came poor and they are leaving fairly wealthy. That's one level of it. And this is going to be the fulfillment of the second promise given to Abraham. But there's still another question that none of us, with all of our conversations, have managed to pick up. You're leaving Egypt. You're leaving from the lowest of the low. You've just seen a nation who focus so much on material experiences and wealth. Are you not disgusted by this? By so much? Is there nothing more important than collecting dollar bills? Is that what we're left with? Collecting dollars? Yes, it's true that it's a promise from God, it's a promise to Abraham, you're going to have a lot of wealth, but still, is this what the Jewish people are up to, collecting wealth? And this brings us to section B. Okay, section B, spiritual earnings. And so with a brief introduction to understand this whole thing, we need to have a crash course, a crash lesson on Kabbalah. Let's get some basic Kabbalah included, and that'll teach us a little more about what's going to happen next. Well, when God created the world, he creates the world, it says Bereshis. Bereshis, the first letter of Bereshis, is a base. The numerical value of the word Bereshis, of the first letter base, is 2. So the first letter in the entire Torah is number 2. This gives us a little hint into a Kabbalistic idea. When God created the world, he started out in one version. That didn't work, so he remodeled it and created another version. Let's discuss this for a moment. The first version was called Tohu, T-O-H-U. That's how you spell it in English. You spell it in Hebrew, Tohu, Taf, He, Vav, Tohu. And you'll find this, of course, you'll find the reference to this in the beginning of the Torah, where it says that the world was Tohu Vavohu. The world was in abandonment, perhaps. It was just breaking everything, wasn't working. So what is the idea? Tohu, in a way, means chaos, or it means things not fitting together. When God created the world, he creates many different mediums of energy flowing. We call it light. In Kabbalah, it's called light, or. All of these different lights serve different purposes. One of them flows God's energy of kindness. Another one flows God's energy of severity, etc. And there's 10 different levels of this flow of energy. In the first version, in world 1.0, all of these energies were 100%. They were 100% energies. And they didn't take into consideration any of the other energies that were moving around in the world that God had created. So there was a lot of Chachma, there's a lot of Binah, there's a lot of Das, there's a lot of Chesed, a lot of Gevurah, a lot of Tiferes. All of these different Kabbalistic lights were not working with each other. Think, for example, think of a person who has like a massive idea, and it's just so exciting and so cool and so formidable and life-changing, but the person doesn't have any words to talk about it. There's tons of energy, there's tons of intellectual energy, but the person has no ability to communicate this, possibly because he hasn't yet thought it through, possibly because he's too excited to talk about it. He just doesn't have the words yet to handle it. In the same way, all of these tohu lights of God's energy are too vibrant to handle each other. And so what happens? What happens when a person has too much information in his head and he cannot communicate it to anybody and he's just dealing with all the information? He has a personal explosion, an individual personal explosion. Call it a breakdown, call it something else. In the Kabbalah, all of these different lights that could not work with each other and were just bouncing off each other and not working together, not fusing together, they create an explosion. Big Bang, I don't know, call it Shivirat HaKelim. Shiviras HaKelim is the breaking of the vessels. The light needs a vessel to go into. If there's too much light and the vessel can't hold them, the vessels will break. Think, for example, if you take a very fine champagne glass and you take a hose, a garden hose, and you put the garden hose into the glass, not only will it fill up really quick, the glass might break as well, right? And so this is what happens. Thank you very much. This is what happens next with these two worlds. The world of Tohu explodes, and there are shards of God's light that are splintered and left over all over the place. That's called the breaking of the vessels, Shavirat HaKelim. And because it all breaks, it's all around. Now God recreates the world and creates and funnels the energies in a way where they're able to flow and where they're able to handle each other, and they're able to work themselves out, and they're able to form the world that we know. But what happened to the old world? What happened to the Tohu world? All of those shards of energies, 288 in total, are strewn all over Earth, waiting to be collected and fixed. By the way, just if you're looking for to use the term Tikkun Olam ever, this is the ultimate Tikkun Olam, this conversation that we're talking about right now. So, and that's why the world that we are experiencing now, where all of God's energies fit together and make sense and are able to coordinate themselves, that's called Olam HaTikkun, the world of Tikkun, T-I-K-U-N, the world of Tikkun. Okay, so with all of this said, What do we do now with all of these shards of energy of God's light from the world of Tohu that are lost in our world? Well, these shards of energy are actually to be found in physical items, in physical things. And our job is to use that physical thing for a mitzvah and retrieve the godly energy in that physical thing and bring it back into its being used for God, for godly purposes. And there's a verse for that. If you open up your Chumash or you rely on me for this verse, it's in Deuteronomy, Devarim 8, chapter 8, verse 3. It says, Lo yal alechem levada yichya adam ki al pi moitze pi Hashem yichya adam, something like that. It says, it is not by bread alone that man lives, but by all that comes out of God's mouth. What does that mean? We live, we thrive on the energy that God has invested in physical things. Yes, it tastes good to eat, but that's not what food is. Food is a container of God's energy. I take that energy from God and I live on that energy. By the way, if food is a container of energy, wouldn't I want to eat only the energy that's appropriate for me, as in kosher? That was a digression. Okay, and so, my friends, this brings us from the beginning of section B. We're going to go to source number 5. Source number 5 in our source notes is a quote from the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe of all time, who lived about 200 and something years ago, author of the Tanya, author of the Shulchan Aruch, rewriter of the Siddur as we know it today, and the first one to teach Chassidut in a way of Chabad. Now, let's take a look at what he has to say in source number 5. So, 288 sparks fell by the shattering of the vessels, the Shvirat HaKelim. And during the exile in Egypt, the Jews elevated 202 of them. Just gives you an impression of how potent the Jewish people were at that time, how strong they were, how capable they were. 202 out of 288 they dealt with right there. Well, this is the intention of the verse. They drained Egypt of its wealth. They drained Egypt of the verse. Because they collected all 202 sparks that were there in Egypt, they took away all the wealth that was there. Ultimately, they collected what they were sent there to get. And this also explains the verse, a great mixed multitude, heir of Rav, went up with them out of Egypt, and the verse, Rav, many are with you, Rav Loch. So, learning from this section on in the Rebbe spiritual wealth and spiritual and material wealth at the bottom of page 6, we now know that the plundering of Egypt before leaving it at the sea wasn't only a physical act. It was a collection of divine sparks. There was a reason for this. They needed to collect something there. The Torah speaks of a mixed multitude, the heir of Rav, which joined the people during the Exodus, and Rav has a numerical value of 202. Rav, Reish is 200, base is 2, representing the 202 sparks that were elevated, and that left only 86 sparks left. In other words, for the Jewish people, spiritual and material matters are integrated. One cannot truly appreciate material wealth without investing it within spirituality, and one cannot truly be fulfilled spiritually without implementing his idea on a material level. After all, action is the main thing. So a Jewish person must have his physical and his spiritual fused together, so that when you've got a spiritual excitement for something, do something with that spiritual excitement. And when you've got something physical, use it for something spiritual. That is how we collect these sparks, and that's how we elevate them. And this is reflected in the great wealth associated with the Exodus. The Jewish people went after the gold and silver upon the express commandment of God himself. And like Rashi says, Hashem begged Moses to ensure that the Jews left in great wealth so that his promise to Abraham that following the enslavement they would experience great prosperity would be fulfilled. So right now, where we stand on the end of page 7, the end of section 2, we now understand that God has instructed the Jewish people to collect these sparks, collect the wealth, not because you need wealth right now. Forget it, you're going into the desert. What are you going to do with wealth there? There's no one to buy and sell from. No, the Jewish people need the wealth because in the wealth is invested those 202 sparks that the Jewish people need to salvage from Egypt and elevate and bring back to the world of Tikkun. Now, my friends, I ask you all a rhetorical question. If it's a mitzvah, it is a mitzvah to search, to retrieve, to get all that wealth out of Egypt. Who's the ultimate Jew? At least in the story of Exodus? Moses. What's Moses busy doing? Has anyone read the article on the Wall Street Journal about all the wealth that Moses retrieves from Egypt? In fact, what we'll discover in the next source number 6, is that Moses is busy taking only one thing with him. Source number 6, Moses took Joseph's remains with him. Joseph had bound the Jews by an oath. God will surely remember you, and you must then bring my remains out of here with you. So where's Moses during this major, call it extortion of wealth out of Egypt? Not collecting wealth, even though he received this instruction from the Holy One, blessed be he. Where is Moses? Finding the bones of Joseph. Let's read about it. Source number 7. Susan, please take the mic.
Moses took Joseph's remains with him. Come and see how precious the mitzvot were to Moses. While all the Jews were occupied with the spoils of Egypt, Moses was busy fulfilling a commandment. In this regard, the verse says, Proverbs 10:8, the wise-hearted chose mitzvot. How did Moses know where Joseph was buried? They said, Sarah, the daughter of Asher, is the only one left from the first generation. Moses went to Sarah and asked her where Joseph was buried, and she answered, the Egyptians made Joseph a coffin out of metal and sunk his body in the Nile River in order to bless the waters. Moses went to the river and said, Joseph, Joseph, God's oath to take the Jews out of Egypt is being fulfilled, and it's time to fulfill the oath you put on the Jews. Now listen, the Jews are being held back because of you. If you reveal yourself, good. If not, we are free of your promise. Immediately, Joseph's coffin surfaced. Rabbi Natan relates, Joseph's remains were in the tomb of the kings. Moses stood at the tomb and cried, Joseph, Joseph. Immediately, Joseph's coffin began to shake, and Moses took the coffin. This is what the verse implies when it says Moses took Joseph's remains with him.
What do you guys see? Do you see the text up there?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So we change the slide. Okay, and here we go. Now this makes it easier for the people who do not have the source notes with them, although typically it's recommended you get the source notes with you. Okay, so we read this Mechilta, we read this Medrash. Thank you, Susan, for reading it for us. That Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is teaching this lesson. Where was Moses? Moses was collecting the bones of Joseph. How did he do it? One option is he went and asked Sarah, the daughter of Asher, to find where is Joseph, and she tells him he's in the Nile. So Moses goes to the Nile and says, let's go. Option number 2 is that Moses went into the tomb of kings, and he stood there and he said, Joseph, Joseph. and the right coffin shook, and so he knew which one to take, and off they went. Option number 2. In both of these, we discover that while everybody else is collecting wealth, Moses is finding Joseph's bones. And so this brings us to the Rebbe Moses wasn't confused. So let's take a look over here, and it's on the screen, so anyone can now follow along with us. Let's ask Professor Yossi, can you read for us, please, on the screen? Nonetheless, you are muted. You have to unmute yourself first. Oh, no. There you go. Okay, Moses wasn't confused. Take it away in English.
Where do you want me to read?
Nonetheless, the first paragraph.
Oh, the English?
Yes, please.
Nonetheless, the different midrashic teaching seems to imply the opposite. Moses personally went to bring the coffin of Joseph along, and the midrash praises him for being occupied with mitzvot, while the rest of the Jewish people were busy with their own gold and silver. Therein lies a lesson for every Jew. As we stand at the threshold of the exodus from our exile, which we will leave with great wealth, it is important to clarify this matter.
Okay, well, so something's happening over here. Moses has a commandment from God. Tell the Jewish people, go collect all that wealth. And of course, really we understand that Moses' instruction from Hashem is to tell the people to get the wealth of God's presence, of God's investment out of these items and bring it back to where it's meant to be. So you would expect that Moses would be leading by example. But where is he? He's finding the remains of Joseph. And he wants to take the remains of Joseph with him on a trip. So the question is, why does Moses need to do this? Why does Moses need to take these bones specifically? And so that brings us to, how do we move to the next one? That takes us to the next page. A famous Hasidic parable tells of a king who opened his doors wide and allowed any citizen to obtain an audience. The simple folk all entered the palace, but they were so blinded by the beauty and splendor of the outer rooms that they remained mesmerized there, missing their opportunity to go see the king. Those who were wiser continued into the inner chambers. However, it takes true wisdom, and even that is sometimes not enough, to not get carried away by the opulence in the king's palace, in the king's inner chambers, and to remember that the main purpose is to get to the king's very throne room. So understanding this story tells you that sometimes we can get distracted by all the things around us and miss that which we came for. The invitation was come see the king. But the greatness all around us can distract us. It's just a parable. What's the lesson? We are placed in the world for a very certain purpose, and we can, on the way, find many exciting, good things to do. But sometimes that can be a distraction from what you're meant to do. Let's take a look. What are the Jewish people meant to do? And let's ask Ron. Ron, can you read for us the first page, these two paragraphs? And you need to unmute because you're muted.
Muted?
Yeah. Okay, off you go. The parable indicates.
The parable indicates the wisdom alone does not always suffice. from a purely intellectual perspective, the precious items found in the king's outer chambers may be so valuable that they will provide for you throughout your lifetime in this world and in the next, without ever reaching the king himself. Therefore, it is important to clarify that even when Egypt is available to be plundered by the express commandment of Hashem, we shouldn't forget that there is something more important, the connection to Joseph, the Joseph of every generation.
My friends, this is important right here. There's something more important than chasing physical wealth. There's something more important than collecting all of those sparks. Where did Moses go? Moses went to find Joseph. What does Joseph represent in the exilic experience, in the time that we're in Egypt? What's Joseph about? From the time that Jacob passes away, we only have the 12 sons left. Of the 12 sons, the leader of the people, the one who's looking out for the people and taking care of them on a physical, material, and spiritual level, is Joseph. Joseph is effectively, call it the northern star of the people. Joseph is the leader. Joseph is the director. We look to Joseph and we say, Joseph, what do we do next? How do we perform? How do we behave? What's important for us as a people? The Joseph of our generation. What's the reference? The Rebbe is talking about his father-in-law. This teaching is 9 years after the passing of the Rebbe's father-in-law, which was commemorated 3 days ago on the 10th day of Shvat, on Tuesday, on today's Thursday, so on Wednesday, 2 days ago yesterday. And the Rebbe is referring to his father-in-law and saying, in our time in exile, what's the important thing to be focused on? Yes, there's a lot of good things to do, but we've got to look to Joseph and find out, look to the leader of the generation, to the northern star of our time, and say, what is the instruction, the appropriate next step for us, for me to do right now? And that's what Moses did. Moses went to Joseph and said, I'm focused on you. I'm pulling you. I'm bringing you with me. You're the most important thing for me here in this time. And this is a lesson for every person in simple terms. And this is also the last paragraph of our curriculum. If we can somehow turn the page over here and put it back into shared mode, the last page of the curriculum, and share the screen so everyone can see it right there. Have you got it? No. That was a fail. That's what we call a fail. How do you broadcast it? You don't. You see it. It's right there. It wasn't a fail. Okay, it's right there. And this, the lesson for every person in simple terms. Let's ask somebody to read it for us. Professor Balaz, please read for us again.
The lessons for every person in simple terms, despite the fact that one could amass great wealth in a way which is meaningful on a literal level and Kabbalistic level, enriching oneself both materially and spiritually. Nonetheless, we must remember that the truly wise choose mitzvot. They choose to connect to the essence of Joseph in Hebrew, bones.
That's smart.
What?
The Hebrew word for bones.
Atzamot. Oh,
atzamot.
Okay. Is the same word as essence, atzmut.
Yep.
This allows a person to reach his ultimate purpose, the true good of every individual and the general good as well.
Thank you, Professor. So what do we have? So the last paragraph told us, and it's a kind of a play on the word, atzmut means, atzamot can also be read atzmut. Joseph is looking Moses is looking for the atzamot of Joseph, or perhaps he's looking for the atzmot of Joseph. He's looking for the bones, or maybe he's looking for the essence of. He's looking for what does Joseph stand for, and what does the leadership stand for? What is the appropriate thing for me to be doing right now? That's what he's looking for. So what is the lesson that we can learn from Moses? What's this lesson here? That one might think that I'm in the right place. At the very least, I'm in the right place. I'm using my time productively. I'm doing the right thing. I'm good. The story of Moses is telling us something else, though. That sometimes you have to make a decision between the best of two goods. Typically, we talk about the best of two evils. Now we're talking about the best of two goods. Sometimes we need to pick between two good things. Yes, it's a good deed, but maybe this good deed is a distraction from another good deed. So yes, it's essential to get the gold and silver from the Egyptians, a commandment from God after all. But Moses nevertheless felt that he was tasked now with an even more important mission. What's that mission? To recover the remains of Joseph. And of course, Rabbi Shimon, who we quoted in the Mechilta, is praising that. Is praising Moses for doing this. He calls him wise-hearted. Now, in our Sikha from the Rebbe doesn't say what is the work that you're meant to do. The message is connect myself with the Joseph. Connect myself with the leader. When I'm connected with the leader, I will receive from him the instructions, the directions of the best place for me to go. That's how I download the right priority. What's more important? Which one of the two good things that I could do are more important? And the classic example of having two good things is when there's lots of people out there that are missing any opportunity at fulfilling a mitzvah, learning Torah, doing something good, but I still have my own personal commandment and instruction to do my own good deed. Every Jew is instructed, you got to learn Torah all day. Maybe I should just stay home and learn Torah, but rather the Rebbe tells me, go out there, go to throughout Georgia, pick up every Jew, do an extra mitzvah, find another Jew. In the same way, the Rebbe is giving a similar instruction to every one of us, all of us, Susan and Ron and Robert and Juan and Yossi, and all of us, and Yaakov. Go find another Jew. There's another Jew near you. Go find them. Do one more mitzvah. If it's lighting a Shabbos candles, if it's giving a tzedakah, if it's learning another line of Torah, of Chumash, we can find someone else to do one more mitzvah with them. That might be the priority, prioritizing, doing an extra good deed that no one else can do instead of taking care only of myself. Perhaps the starkest contrast between some groups of Jews who stay at home and build their own communities versus groups of Jews who go out to assist others in having access to what's rightfully theirs. This is a lesson that we can learn from how Moses is given the instruction: collect all the wealth, lift up all 202 spas. But in the meanwhile, Moses knows that there's something that needs to be done that no one else can do, and he must go get it. And he goes and gets the essence of Joseph, and he brings Joseph in, and he brings and he fulfills that instruction.
Of course, that was fulfilling a promise to Joseph, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, correct. That was a promise that Joseph had asked, and we read that in one of the sources, that Joseph says, please ensure that my bones do not remain here. They've got to come up. And in other words, please remain that my essence. Joseph doesn't want to stay in exile. He wants to come with the people. He wants to be included, something that only Moses can do. And my friends, it's 13 minutes past the hour. So I wish everybody that you can, I wish you all a good Shabbos. And thank you for joining us and celebrating our Parsha together with us. Hang around for more questions and answers and other important topics.